What's up everybody, it's Jay here, and today I wanted to talk about Ireland's marriage equality referendum. For those of you who don't know, in 2015, which is now 5 years ago, this time in 2015, Ireland had a referendum on same-sex marriage, and the majority of people who voted in the country voted yes, meaning that on that day, Ireland became the first country in the world to legalize same-sex marriage by popular vote. I was obviously around at the time. I was a teenager. I wasn't old enough to vote, but I was a teenager. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that experience because I both wanted to discuss like my experience of that time and also stuff that I've thought about and realized since then about that experience. So, just a little bit of more basic information for those of you who don't know. Um, how this kind of worked is that you need to have a referendum to change things in the constitution in Ireland. That's how referendums work in Ireland. And that meant that we were voting on constitutionally defining marriage as between two people regardless of gender, so that it wouldn't be just men and women who could get married to each other, but that a man could marry a man, a woman could marry a woman, and hopefully in future when we have legal non-binary recognition, that a non-binary person could marry a person of any gender as well. So that was what the vote was about, and that was how it worked. And I was 15 at the time. I was in my third year of secondary school. I had come out as trans a year prior at this point. Like I had been out for like just over a year in terms of like when I first came out to my parents, but I had actually only been out to most people in my life for only a few months because I had only come out in school at the start of that year, and I had only come out to like extended family within the last few months. So I was out to everyone, but I wasn't I hadn't been out for long. And obviously at the time I was out as trans, but also as straight. I wasn't out as gay or bi or queer in any sense of the word, other than just being trans. So it was definitely a little bit of a different experience. There was definitely a level of like being removed from it because of the fact that people didn't, well, for the most part, people didn't consider me to be affected. At the time, however, things were a little bit different. Like it's a bit complicated because theoretically, like I was a straight person, so it wouldn't matter. So that wasn't quite the case at the time because gender recognition had not actually been like brought into law yet. So if even though I was straight in identity at the time, if I wanted to get married to a woman, I wouldn't have been able to because I wasn't yet able to have my gender legally recognized either. So there was kind of more to it than that. I made no secret of my opinion on the vote. I made no secret about what vote I wanted. I still have a badge. It's actually up on my wall there. I still have a badge from the Yes Equality campaign, and you know the thing that I think about it a lot is that like my experience of it is obviously very different than a lot of people who were older than me at the time. Because while I was 15 and I already had like a strong sense of like right and wrong, and I already had a strong kind of political compass of my own, there was a lot of stuff going on that I couldn't understand, that like I wasn't aware of, that I didn't know about because I was young and I didn't have anybody in my life who cared as much about it as I did, who was older, who could tell me those things, explain those things to me. One of the most notable things about my experience of the marriage equality referendum is that the school that I was in, who shall remain nameless, hosted a fake referendum. So all of the students in the school were given a ballot paper during roll call in the morning, and we were asked to vote. And that was, at the time, I thought quite a fun experience, and looking back on it, really not so fun and kind of in bad taste, I would say. So part of the reason why I would say it was kind of in bad taste is, number one, it meant that when you were given the results, you knew precisely the proportion of students in your school who were homophobic, effectively. And that that was challenging. Like, it was a 90% yes within my school, which was nice, obviously, but that still meant that like there was 10% of students that were homophobic in my school. So when I went into a 30-person classroom, odds were three people in the room didn't think that I deserved like full equality and that I deserved the same rights as other people. And I think that was kind of something they didn't consider about having a fake referendum. Like, it is definitely a plan that was come up with the confidence that it was going to pass. Because otherwise, like, can you imagine if you'd had a fake marriage referendum in a school and it hadn't passed, and then all of the gay students were living in fear? Like, there was definitely a level of short-sightedness in that sense. Another reason why I think it wasn't necessarily a good idea is that it was it kind of started a lot of conversations and debates about it in the classroom that were actually more akin to a debate. And I don't think that schools shouldn't have debates or discussions, but I think stuff like respect for LGBT people isn't a topic that can be debated in schools, because that inherently makes the school environment unsafe for LGBT people. It inherently means that their lives, their existences and experiences are something that their classmates can debate freely, and that's not right, and that's not really fair. It's at least different, when it comes to older people who are like grown adults who are able to disengage, and it's not a mandatory thing that they have to experience. But like, I was 15, I couldn't walk out of class just because that conversation was happening. It wasn't something I could just get away from. So I think that was a little bit short-sighted in one sense. And the final thing that kind of feeds me off the most now, retrospectively, was that the result of the fake marriage referendum was the having of a fake gay wedding in the school. I don't know, realistically, whether the teachers, there were any teachers in my school who were LGBT, and I will never know, more than likely. But what I do know with relative confidence is that all of the teachers who were involved in the fake wedding were in heterosexual marriages. And they certainly weren't known to the students to be LGBT people. And I think that was a bit tone deaf in a way. And I think that the promise of a fake gay marriage, if your fake marriage referendum comes true, would definitely be appetizing for certain homophobic students and would entice them to vote yes so they can take the piss. So that was a big part of the school experience. The other thing that happened in my school experience was that because I was only in third year, there was 3 years worth of older students in the school, and some of those students there was like a good few queer students in the years ahead of me, and some of them were kind of a lot more confident and a lot more brave than I was when I was 15. No campaign posters that were advocating against marriage equality went up along the road outside our school. There was one on a lamppost directly outside the school, and some of those students climbed a lamppost to take it down, and they also drew like a rainbow at the front gate of the school. And I definitely think that had an impact on me. I felt sort of reassured by that, and I felt sort of protected by that. And like, these older queer people in the school, like, they were people I knew and I trusted, and like, I still know some of them, like not very well, but like we would still know each other to see. So that was kind of an experience that occurred. And so the thing that I think about now, like in the aftermath of all of this, and I took to Twitter recently to talk about it. I will link the tweets in the description box below so you can see what I'm talking about. And I was surprised because it's something I hadn't discussed with people before. And I tweeted basically talking about how do people in Ireland feel the voting impacted on them? Because at that point in time, Ireland was kind of, like I said, first country to legalise same-sex marriage through a popular vote. It wasn't something that had been done in many places, if any places. Having a vote had been seen like as a risky option. Like, I've since watched a documentary about marriage equality, and there was a strong view within the community that having a vote was risky. It was a risk that it wouldn't go through, and it was detrimental to the community well-being to have to kind of have a vote and have a debate and have all these conversations. And while I was kind of too young to understand or to have seen some of it at the time, there was a lot of nastiness going on in terms of like debates and stuff like that. And I think it had a lasting impact on me as like a 15-year-old queer person to know that like even though it passed, it was seen as okay to have this public debate about my rights and my legitimacy as a person. And that was kind of hard to process, especially since I recently learned through this conversation that I started on Twitter that the referendum wasn't necessarily something that had to be done to legally redefine marriage in Ireland as being like equal between LGBT people and straight people. So there's that as well, now that I know better now. But a lot of people kind of chimed in saying that a lot of LGBT people felt that their mental health was really impacted by the fact that, you know, they had to constantly advocate and justify themselves, their rights, their needs and stuff like that to people who often had bad faith arguments against people and were appealing to stuff that wasn't relevant, like issues of like children and adoption, which were not part of the actual referendum at all. And, you know, a lot of people felt like they were really impacted in their mental health by having to have those conversations. And the reality is that without those conversations, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. So they were very necessary in trying to win this referendum, but they were also very detrimental to people in the community. And that's something that definitely needs to be acknowledged. The thing that I did the maths. One of the things that kind of bugs me about it is that Ireland only had a 60% voter turnout, right? So that means that 40% of people in the country didn't vote at all. Of the people who voted, about 60% voted yes and about 40% voted no. So that means mathematically that when you go into a room, the majority of people in the room either don't care to the extent that they didn't bother to vote either way, or actively don't think you deserve rights. You know, you can look at the result and think, oh, well, if I go into a room, 6 out of 10 people will think I deserve rights. But if you go into a room that is representative of the population of Ireland, there will be people who didn't vote. And that kind of changes things up a bit. It means that I think it's only about like 4 people then, when you go into a room, actively think you deserve rights. And then, you know, a certain portion of those people are going to be LGBT. And like, that's something we know. That's something we have to consider and that we have to think about. And that's something we're aware of now. I do think things are a little bit different now. I would be fairly confident in saying that if there was another vote, if the vote was done again today, knowing what we know now, the margin would be bigger, because a lot of the fears that people had about marriage equality, they just didn't come true. Like, marriage equality was legalised and the sky didn't fall in, and kids aren't just being abused rampantly by queer parents or anything like that, and like kids aren't being turned queer or anything like that. None of the fears that people had about legalising same-sex marriages actually transpired. And so I do think that knowing that, people would have a different perspective today. But regardless, like, I think that I'm glad it's over. And on one level, I'm very glad it happened when I was too young to fully participate, because I think that participating more than I did would have been very detrimental to my like emotional well-being. So that is what I wanted to talk about today. If you like the video, please do click the like button. Please comment if you have your own perspective on this, obviously, especially if you're older than me and you were able to vote and stuff like that. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Or even if you aren't from Ireland, if you're just, you know, chiming in about your perspective on the topic, that's cool. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.